Legolas stood on the edge of the woods near his home. He hadn't been able to find the young ranger, and the sun was beginning to dip low on the horizon. He had sent some of his most trusted companions out to find the young human, but Aragorn had hid himself well. Where would I go if I were a human in a wood full of elves, and I had just found out that some of them were not kind to my presence? The prince spoke the words out loud, idly thinking to himself, trying to remember all the places he had shown the young man over the past month of his stay. I hope he didn't return home, my lord. Legolas turned and smiled at the elf who walked up next to him. No luck, Trellin? None. He was not near the ford, and I tracked back all the way to the river's head. The smaller elf followed the prince's gaze into the woods. Shall I continue searching? Legolas returned his attention to his friend. No, but thank you. Worry not, Trellin. I will find him. There are a few others I need to find also. The elf frowned as he thought about the warriors he needed to speak with. With a sigh, he headed out into the woods, his senses alert for any lead on the whereabouts of his friend. Aragorn sat cross-legged on the rocky outcropping that overlooked the deep valley of Mirkwood. He had found the place purely by accident. From his vantage point, he could keep track of all the elves as they came and went. Those he didn't know he simply hid from when they got too close to his hiding place. He had become better at melting into his surroundings and being invisible when he wanted to, and today he wanted to. His thoughts strayed back to his encounter with Sarkalion and his friends. He frowned at the memory. Perhaps it was time to go home. It had been much longer than a fortnight, like he had promised his father, and he was beginning to miss his own family, especially after the visit from Mellon and Elrohir. And maybe, just maybe, he had worn out his welcome here in the fair woods. He swung his legs over the edge of the rocky perch and tapped his boot heels against the shale rock face, kicking small pebbles loose that cascaded down the cliff, landing far below him. The sun had warmed the blackened rocks, and he closed his eyes, letting his head fall back as he soaked up the last of the warm rays before they slipped below the canopy of trees. The wind shifted slightly, and the quiet sounds of the forest rose up to his vantage point. He heard the pines rustling in the breeze, and the sounds of a group of elves walking beneath the trees and talking. He recognized Sarkalion's voice among them, and glanced quickly down into the valley. Slipping out of sight, he silently slid down the back of the rock, and curiously trailed the small group of elves, staying far enough behind them not to be detected. He was utterly surprised when he heard the elves hail Legolas, and began talking to the elven prince. Aragorn sidled up to a large pine downwind from the group of elves, and within earshot. The conversation he overheard gripped his heart, and he found himself barely breathing as he tried to catch every word. "He is dangerous, Legolas." Sarkalion turned towards the prince. "He has knowledge of us and our people that a mortal being should not have. He bested you with the ancient techniques and warfare that is denied even to us, and we are your brothers." The warrior paused before continuing. "I'm going to approach Thranduil and request that he be sequestered here in the woods." Legolas began to protest, but Sarkalion cut him off. "I saw your last sparring match and found nothing humorous in it, unlike Ranian. He would live a good life here in the woods. You said yourself, he is a young, arrogant Dunedain. He'll probably just get himself killed. Here at least he would be safe, and so would we." "He is not dangerous. You do not know him, sir." The young elf lord used his friend's nickname, trying to calm the warrior. "What business does a prince of Mirkwood have with a mortal anyway?" Sarkalion's anger was barely constrained, "especially with you. You hate men, do you not? Or have you forgotten Dorlin? This Dunedain is a man, Legolas." Legolas's shoulders tightened, and his lips compressed into a tight line. The small band of elves that accompanied the warrior quietly voiced their agreement with Sarkalion's statement. Aragorn pressed himself back against the trunk of the tree that concealed him from the group of elves. He closed his eyes and held his breath. He had dreaded this moment since he had stepped foot in Mirkwood. He half feared the words that would come next out of the elf prince's mouth, but he could not tear himself away. Swallowing hard, he resigned himself to the betrayal and waited. Legolas riveted gray eyes on the elf in front of him, and spoke slowly, as though he was talking to a young child. His tone was even and hard, and the words that fell from his lips were clipped in anger. "You know not of what you speak, Sarkalion. That Dunedain is no ordinary mortal. That one is my friend, and I will not suffer him to your persecutions, nor your ill-placed fears. Any of you." The elf prince stepped closer to the warrior, daring the others to contradict him. You will not contain him in any way. Beneath these woods he will come to no harm. Do you understand the things I am saying to you?" When the others nodded and lowered their gazes, Legolas continued, his voice low so only those near could make out the words. Aragorn leaned slightly around the tree base, straining to hear the conversation. "If you speak any of this folly to my father, you will find more than me against your position. Leave Strider alone." He turned back to the small band of elves that had gathered. "Let no elf touch that Dunedain with any intent to harm him, or you will answer to me. Am I understood?" The assent of the elves was enough to satisfy the prince. His presence softened, and he nodded at the warriors gathered around him. "Go now. We will not speak of this again. It will not be held against you." With muttered thanks, the small group disbanded. Legolas gently laid a hand on Sir Calian's back and evenly met the other's gaze. "I thank you for your concern, although it is misplaced. Give him time. You will see him as I do. You are a good friend, sir." The warrior looked at the forest momentarily before smiling and accepting the compliment. Within moments only Legolas stood in the small glade. He turned towards the stand of trees to his right and smiled. "You can come out now." Aragorn froze, surprise stealing all thoughts from his mind. He really had thought he had been quiet enough to be undetected. As the realization sunk in that Legolas had known his hiding place the whole time, he wondered if the elf had meant the things he'd said at all, or had only said them because of Aragorn's presence. Was he in danger? So preoccupied was the young ranger with deciding what to do next that he never noticed when the elf stepped up next to him and leaned quietly against the tree. "You heard it all?" Aragorn jumped and stepped back warily. With a sigh, Legolas pushed away from the tree trunk. "Then you did." He looked down at the ground, considering his next words, but the ranger spoke quietly. "Did you mean any of it?" Legolas's eyes snapped up and fixed on the humans. He continued before the elf could answer. "If you didn't, I'll understand. But you know full well you cannot keep me here. I will leave tonight if you wish. I never meant to cause you any trouble." "Aragorn." Legolas whispered his name loud enough for the human to hear. "I thought I had your trust." "So did I." "Do you still think I hold it against you, the fact that you were born a man?" Legolas shook his head slowly, almost sadly. Aragorn did not answer. "Then I guess I have a lot to prove to you." Legolas circled the human, speaking softly. "I meant every word I said. You are my friend. You know my secrets, and I know yours. Our lives are bound together. I would no sooner betray you than I would my own heart." He stopped in front of the ranger and pierced him with a knowing gaze. "Aragorn, son of Arathorn, heir of Isildur, you have my loyalty. And while under these trees you have all the privileges and safety of any of my father's people. You have nothing to fear." Aragorn was speechless. Reaching out swiftly, he clasped the elf's forearm with his hand and gripped it tightly. "Thank you." His voice was soft, and he searched the gray eyes that stared back into his. "As I live, you will always be welcome in the House of Rivendell. I am honored by your friendship." Legolas pulled the man into a warm embrace and pounded the human on the back. "Besides, it would do me no good to make enemies with one who has been taught in the forbidden knowledge of elven warring," he teased as he pulled it lightly away. A brilliant smile spread across the ranger's face, and he fell easily into step next to his friend as they walked back down the overgrown path. "You know, I was thinking about that." Aragorn watched Legolas out of the corner of his eye. "Do you think I could practice that move with you some more? I think I'm still a little rusty on that one." Legolas danced out of reach. "Not with me, you don't. Perhaps I can find some poor unwitting soul, but it will never be me again." "I'll go easy on you," Aragorn prodded with a grin. "No," Legolas rolled his eyes. "Well, can we practice if I just—" "No!" The elven prince cut him off. "Will you let me at least—" the ranger persisted, but was again cut off mid-sentence. "No!" "I could Strider?" Legolas turned to Aragorn and pointed at the man to silence him, cutting him off before he could continue further. "No, do not speak another word." Aragorn's laughter caught at the elf, and soon they were both laughing at the human's impudence.